You weren't wearing a seatbelt. You were in the back seat, maybe the front. Your parents smoked with the windows barely cracked. Fleetwood Mac or the Eagles drifted through the AM radio. And no one was hovering over you. It wasn't cruelty. They just weren't monitoring every breath you took. And that absence of constant supervision shaped you more than you probably realize. The people who grew up in the 1970s carry a psychological imprint that still runs quietly beneath their lives. It's subtle, but it's there. This goes beyond nostalgia. Beyond the tired phrase, things were simpler back then. Maybe they were. But what did that simplicity actually cost, and what did it create? Let's talk about something uncomfortable. The 1970s was the first decade when the American family began visibly coming apart. In places like the United States, divorce rates surged, nearly doubling between the 1960s and the 1980s, with the peak landing in the mid to late 70s. For millions of children, that wasn't a statistic. It was Thursday afternoon. Researchers, who examined what's often called the divorce generation, noticed something striking. Kids who experienced family breakdown during this era developed a very particular worldview. Love can disappear. Stability doesn't last. And adults are trying, even when their effort isn't enough. That last belief matters more than most people understand. Because children of the 70s didn't just witness instability, they normalized it. They learned how to function inside it. How to keep moving forward without making a scene. How to show up at school on Monday and act like nothing happened. There's something quietly tragic about how efficient that made you. Picture this. It's 1977. You're 11. Your mother is late picking you up from a friend's house. She forgot. She's juggling 2 jobs now. Your father left 8 months ago. Life is heavier, thinner, tighter. She doesn't apologize. You don't expect her to. You both sit in the car facing forward. The silence isn't hostile. It's structural. You learned early how to read emotional weather. You could sense tension before words were spoken. Psychologists studying children of divorce, including Mavis Hetherington, whose 20-year research tracking more than 450 families remains one of the most comprehensive in the field, identified a pattern called parentification. It's when children begin absorbing emotional duties that belong to adults. Not because they're extraordinary, but because the adults around them are overwhelmed. From the outside, that child looks impressively mature. Inside, they often feel alone. You became capable fast, maybe faster than you should have. You learned to minimize your needs. You sensed when asking for more would exhaust someone. So you asked for less. And this is usually where something shifts for people listening, because if this sounds familiar, you've likely framed your self-reliance as personality independent. Low-maintenance strong. But what if it started as adaptation? What if your strength was once survival? That's not a small distinction. And yet, there's another side to 70s childhood that rarely gets acknowledged. You were deeply free. Not in a romantic, cinematic way. Not slow-motion sunlight and soft-focus memories. Real freedom. Unsupervised. Unstructured. Figure it out yourself freedom. You left after breakfast and returned when the streetlights flickered on. No tracking apps. No text messages. No location sharing. Your parents had a general sense of direction, and that was considered sufficient. Developmental psychologists have studied the power of unstructured, child-led play for decades. Peter Gray, for example, has written extensively about how self-directed exploration builds resilience, negotiation skills, creativity, and emotional regulation. Play doesn't look serious, but it trains survival. And children growing up in the 1970s received enormous doses of it. You negotiated rules without adults. You resolved conflicts without mediation. You built worlds out of nothing. You learned independence not from motivational quotes, but from necessity. And that combination, emotional instability at home. Radical autonomy outside, that mix shaped you in ways most people still don't fully understand. You handled your own battles on your street. You negotiated the rules of the game. You figured out who was loyal and who wasn't. No referee. No adult stepping in to smooth it over. Research suggests that environments like that produce something rare, a generation unusually skilled at navigating ambiguity. You can sit with uncertainty. You can tolerate not knowing how something will turn out. And that unsettles people, especially younger generations who were raised on instant answers and constant reassurance. You learned a different rhythm. Resolution doesn't have to happen immediately. You've spent much of your life waiting for clarity. Somewhere along the way, you became fluent in patience, But there was another force shaping you, quieter, cultural, atmospheric. The 1970s carried a mood that was hard to name. The Vietnam War ended in disillusionment. Watergate led to Nixon's resignation. Inflation squeezed families tightly. The bright optimism of the 1960s didn't disappear, it soured. It hardened into irony, into caution, and children absorbed the emotional climate of their era the same way they absorb language, not through instruction, through immersion. What many 70s kids developed was an early, functional sense of irony. A watchfulness around power. It wasn't full-blown cynicism. It was calibrated skepticism. You didn't automatically believe institutions were benevolent. You didn't instinctively assume authority figures had everything under control. Even as a child, the evidence suggested otherwise. The numbers reflect that shift. In 1964, 77% of Americans said they trusted the government to do the right thing most of the time. By 1980, as many of you were stepping out of childhood, that trust had fallen to 25%, a 52-point drop in a single generation. You didn't study distrust in a classroom. You inhaled it. It was in the nightly news humming from the living room, in the tone of adult conversations that went quiet when you entered. In the heaviness you felt before you understood it. That leaves a mark. And yet, here's what's quietly remarkable. Despite fractured homes, despite benign neglect, despite a culture tinged with pessimism, people who grew up in the 70s often form some of the most loyal, deeply rooted relationships of any generation. Because when you commit to someone, you mean it. You weren't raised in a world of constant digital affirmation. There was no endless stream of validation. So when someone showed up for you, really showed up, it registered. And it stayed with you. The friendships you carried from your 20s, the relationships that survived distance, time, hardship, those aren't casual attachments, they carry weight. There's gravity in the way you love, because you learned early that not everything lasts. So when something does, you protect it. Psychologist Dan McAdams speaks about narrative identity, the idea that we understand ourselves through the stories we construct about our lives. For those raised amid instability or emotional complexity, those inner narratives often become layered, nuanced, honest. You're not shocked by contradiction in people. You've lived inside contradictions since childhood. That's not merely a scar. It's a form of wisdom. The kids who rode their bikes home alone, who sat in smoke-filled cars with the radio playing softly. Who grew up while the world opally trembled and still found something worth holding onto. They developed something no curriculum teaches. No perfectly structured childhood can guarantee it. A tolerance for reality as it actually is, not as it should be, not as it's marketed to be. As it is. And if any of this felt less like commentary and more like recognition, if this sounded like someone finally articulating thoughts you've carried quietly for decades, then you already understand. Before you go, consider subscribing if this resonated. It helps more than you think. There's also a join button if you'd like to directly support deeper explorations like this. And on your screen now are more Psychology Simplified videos I think you'll genuinely appreciate. I'll see you there.